um, quieter and more intimate room within the Zoom. But for both platforms, please feel free to join, and you can also leave messages on the chat, and also both the chat here on Zoom and the chat on Facebook. So I'll just give a little self-introduction very fast. My name is Inti Guerrero. I'm the artistic director of BAP, Bellas Artes Projects, which is a nonprofit organization that operates in the Philippines. We are known for having a very active residency program that takes place in the province of Bataan, but that's on hold because of the situation. And we, since about a year now, started an education program called ESKWELA, which we offer seminars and debates around different subjects that we think are relevant to create some kind of theoretical and discursive background, but also an experimental platform where we invite artists, curators, people from academia like today, or filmmakers also like today, where we get the chance to know from their practice or their research what can we learn from different geographies, different time periods, to make a more complex idea on how we understand artistic formation or curatorial practice. So it's quite eclectic, the program. It has both dancers coming in, or as I said, artists and curators and theoreticians. So today I have, well, the deal pleasure to welcome Susan Stryker, who is an incredible figure in the field of trans studies and queer studies. She is a PhD, has a PhD in the United States on history at the University of California in Berkeley, and in 1992, and has helped shape the public conversation on transgender issues for more than 25 years. She was a founding member of the activist group Transgender Nation in the early 1990s. She co-wrote, produced, and directed the Emmy-winning documentary Screaming Queens, The Riot at Compton's Cafeteria from 2005, and she co-edited the Transgender Studies Reader Volumes 1 and 2 in the year 2006 and 2013. And co-edits the academic journal TSQ, Transgender Studies Quarterly, which started in 2014. She was the executive director of the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco, and director of the Institute of the LGBT Studies at the University of Arizona. That was from 2011 to 2016, where she is an associate professor of gender and women's studies. She's currently a visiting professor of women's gender and sexuality studies at Yale University. She's live with us now from San Francisco. Hi, Susan, thank you for joining us. I will introduce later on Yaya Jacobo, our great moderator, who is logging in from Manila. I will do a little introduction later after the end of Susan's intervention, which would be around 35 minutes, so we can have a nice discussion with her and have the pleasure to engage with her. So please don't be shy and ask any questions you have, which will be first moderated by Yaya. So without further ado, I give the microphone to you, Susan.
Hey, thank you. Thank you all for coming to this event tonight. Thanks Inti and Desi and Yaya, Fatima, for all the help in making this happen. I just want to say I'm experiencing a little technical difficulties that when Inti started talking, my Zoom link disappeared out of the corner of my screen, and I can't find where it is on my laptop. So let me just check in with everyone. Are you seeing on the screen the title card, Kaming Mga Talyada, We Who Are Sexy, Transsexual Celebrity, Christine Jorgensen in the Philippines?
We're seeing, on my end, I'm seeing you, just your camera. Yeah.
Okay, because when I look at my screen, all I see is my PowerPoint presentation, and I do not, in fact, see.
Have you shared?
I hear you, but the Zoom window, except when you started talking,
if you have a Mac, just go down and click again the Zoom.
Yeah, I'm not even seeing where that is going to be, because it's in. I clicked on the link through the email that you had sent. Let me see if I can get back in that way.
Don't worry, people will be patient.
Now this is, now there you are, came back. So,
yeah.
All right.
So now you can share the screen.
Now I can share the screen. Let's see, I want to do this. And I want to do, all right, are we there? Are you seeing my PowerPoint?
Yeah, we see it. Perfect.
Great. Okay. So said I hope everyone enjoys this fairly casual and technically unadept presentation today. It's about the film Kaming Mga Talyada, a really interesting film from 1962 that features, as you can see in the newspaper ad, a special appearance, there at the bottom, a special appearance by Miss Christine Jorgensen, who was a famous transsexual celebrity from the United States in the 1950s and early 1960s. I'm presenting here today at the invitation of Inti Guerrero, who saw me screen this film in Amsterdam at a film festival maybe a decade ago. He fell in love with it. He's invited me to present on at a number of different venues and programs that he's curated. And he's been trying to get me to Manila for the last several years. Hasn't happened. I just want to say that it's a really horrible moment that we're all living through historically right now with the pandemic, the economic crisis, and in the U.S. with the government's anti-democratic and authoritarian response to legitimate protests over the latest racial injustices perpetrated by the police. But I'm glad that in the midst of all of that, that this sort of shift to online events with more people staying inside has let me come to Manila virtually. And so, that said, I think we're all learning to be very patient with the technical glitches that can come with these styles of presentations. Since I jotted down my notes about what I would be talking about tonight, there's been some changes that I thought the only version of the film available to audiences in the Philippines would be this very heavily censored version of the film that cut out a lot of the queer content and completely cut out Christine Jorgensen's appearance. But over the last hour, I've been able to get a complete version of the film to Inti, and shortly, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, they'll be able to upload the entire film that I'll be talking about to Vimeo, so people who are really interested can go and watch it. I will be showing some clips tonight. So I just want to say, before I sort of delve in even further, that This film came to my attention because of my historical research on Christine Jorgensen. And that, I just want to acknowledge that I have only a really sort of basic understanding of Filipino history and culture, mostly, as Inti mentioned, from my training as a historian of the United States. So that most of what I know from the vantage point of the history of the US and the Philippines from 1898 to 1945. I did try to learn as much as I could to help me contextualize this film in particular, but I hope you will bear with me, if sort of in my ignorance I say or do something really stupid. I welcome your feedback and instruction, and since we are in ESKWELA, please feel free to school me, in this Q&A session afterwards. So what fascinates me about this film, besides the really surprisingly overt representations of gender and sexual diversity and a mass culture work from this period, and I have to say a really wild and unexpected plot, is the way that the film clearly stages tensions and conflicts between US-based and Filipino-based ways of thinking about bodies, identities, categories of personhood related to sex, gender, and sexuality. That this is actually a central concern of the film. The tension between the newly available, globally circulating category of transsexual and the already existing Filipino concepts of talyada, and the word for which talyada was a euphemism, which is bakla. It's fascinating to watch these problems of, what I think of as a sort of post-colonial epistemology play out in such an ephemeral and ostensibly very lighthearted movie. So just like where I found the film, I was in Copenhagen, where Christine Jorgensen's papers her archival collections are physically housed at the Danish Royal Library. And I was there doing some research to write the introduction to a reissue of Christine Jorgensen's autobiography. It was the autobiography was originally published in 1967. There was a reprint edition that came out in 2000. And in 1999, when I was doing the research to write the introduction for the reissue, I came across an envelope in her papers, a little manila envelope, Philippines. It's a Philippines movie. And I opened it up, and there was information about this film. It was the press packet with some, photos and headshots of the stars and a synopsis of the plot and some newspaper clippings. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. I should try to find out more about this film at some point. And it took me a while. It was very difficult to track down. But at one point, it showed up on a website where you could buy DVD, or you could find VHS copies of old Filipino movies, and boom, there it was. It's not there anymore, but while it was available for sale, I bought a copy of the VHS. I had it digitized. It's now I have DVD copies of it, but it's very, very difficult to find now. It's like I don't know of anyone who has a copy right now other than me. That is a complete version of the film. So I would love at some point to work with people in Manila to see if we could find a better print of the film, to see if we could get a restored print made, get it subtitled and captioned, because I think it's a really important document in from like transgender history, as well as in a sort of the global history of sexuality and gender. All right. So having said all that, who was Christine Jorgensen, and why do I even care? Born in the Bronx, New York, to parents of Danish heritage in 1926, Christine Jorgensen was arguably the most famous person in the world for a few months in 1952 and early 1953, when news of her genital transformation surgery in Copenhagen made headlines around the world. She was like the Caitlyn Jenner trans tipping point person of her generation, but I would say was historically more significant. News of Jorgensen's surgery represented the first time that surgical and hormonal techniques for changing sex had been given that level of attention in the mass media and in the press. And as a result, Jorgensen became the first truly global transsexual celebrity. She stayed more or less in the spotlight for another quarter century. Initial coverage of Jorgensen sensationalized the fact that she was an ex-GI who became a blonde beauty, heightening the tension between contradictory images of a macho fighting man and a curvaceous sex kitten undoubtedly helped sell more newspapers, but in real life, Jorgensen had been more of the proverbial 98-pound weakling who'd get sand kicked in his face by bullies at the beach, rather than being a gung-ho warrior. She had been drafted into the US Army shortly after hostilities ended in World War II and spent most of her 14-month enlistment in New Jersey processing demobilization paperwork for soldiers who were coming back to the US from overseas. So not a combat soldier. It was largely through coverage of Jorgensen that the phenomenon of transsexuality first became widely known to mass audiences. During 1953, when hydrogen bomb tests vaporized islands in the Pacific and England crowned a new queen, when Jonas Salk was developing the polio vaccine and war raged on the Korean Peninsula, more words appeared in print in the world press about Christine Jorgensen than about any other topic. She was very shy to the point of reclusiveness before her gender transition, but because of the notoriety that she received from the press and because of the stigma that was attached to her transsexuality, she felt that her only opportunity for making a living was to basically to capitalize on her fame. And she developed a lucrative nightclub act that exploited the public's fascination with her. She was earning upwards of $5,000 a week throughout most of the 1950s. So, although Jorgensen's stage career was petering out by the early 1960s, which is a point that I will return to in just a moment, her public career had a strong second act. Jorgensen published a best-selling autobiography in 1967, which was turned into a really trashy, exploitative biopic called The Christine Jorgensen Story in 1970. Jorgensen thereafter became a sought-after speaker on the college lecture circuit, drawing crowds that filled football stadiums. As did her earlier stage career, the speaking engagements eventually tapered off. But even into the 1980s, as her star power and name recognition dimmed, Jorgensen appeared frequently on television talk shows and game shows, at celebrity fundraisers and other public events, until bladder cancer finally brought her life to a premature end in 1989 at the age of 62. All right. So to situate Kaming Mga Talyada in the arc of Jorgensen's career. In the early 1960s, her nightclub act, as I said, had pretty much run its course in the mainland United States. It was just getting harder and harder for her to book dates and clubs. Her fees were declining. And so she decided to essentially go on the road. or more to the point, go to sea. That she went on a tour of the Pacific Ocean in search of new audiences. She first stopped in Hawaii, then went to Australia, to Hong Kong, and finally Manila, arriving in 1962 for an extended run at this nightclub called the Safari Club. And it was while in Manila that she was approached by Sampaguita Pictures to appear in a quickie little film that was written specifically to capitalize on her presence in Manila. As the film was written, her nightclub performance was the centerpiece of the film. So it's quite ironic that the censored version of the film that's more available in the Philippines than anything else right now, that sequence has been entirely cut out. There is no Christine Jorgensen in the film that was made to capitalize on Christine Jorgensen's presence. The film featured some of the most popular actors and rising stars and starlets of the day, mostly people who were stars in the Filipino domestic film industry rather than being sort of internationally recognized stars. And that these sort of like hometown favorites were sort of doing a kind of a comic take on their usual screen personas. Particularly in the case of having sort of the leading male heartthrobs and teen idols of the day play roles where they were considered to be Talyada. And more about that in a moment. The film garnered a lot of publicity when it came out, including the magazine feature shown here on the screen right now, in which Jorgensen was cast in a very favorable light. It's like there was no, she was treated as a celebrity and not as a sort of a freak or a curiosity or a pervert or any other sort of pejorative label you want to think of. So what I would like to do now, I might futz around a little bit on my laptop trying to get the clip that I want to show to come up, but I want to show the opening sequence, or not the opening, but sort of the second major sequence in the film. So the film opens in the lobby of the Philippine National Bank in Manila, where several matronly women are gossiping about their children when they spy Chelo, a former acquaintance who they haven't seen for 10 years. Chelo tells her acquaintances that she had actually married a man named Captain Antonio de Magiba, a Filipino man serving in the US military, with whom she's traveled around the world. She's in fact just returned from what she calls pleasure trips to Hong Kong, Paris, Tokyo, and America. She confesses, however, that her husband loves the army more than her, and has more or less abandoned her to pursue the life of a military man in the United States. Fortunately, Chelo tells her friends, she has 7 well-behaved, hardworking, unmarried adult daughters who support her financially. The women then become confused because they remember Chelo as having had 7 sons. At this point, Chelo produces photographs of her children, and the audience is introduced to the 7 Dimagiba siblings. And that is the clip that I will find for you right now. Give me 1 second.
Siguro pwede na lumigaw ang anak ko si Freddy isa sa mga dalaga mo. Aba, hindi naman alahan.
I don't think we're seeing it. I think we're just hearing the audio.
Let's see.
I think first you have to stop the slideshow. So maybe, oh no, you did. And it should be on your Chrome. or your Explorer.
Here we go. All right. Well, yeah, this is like the.
I don't think we're seeing it.
That's the problem. Hold on.
I think you have to minimize the PowerPoint, Susan.
No, I think that we're having actually the same problem that we had yesterday when we were doing the tech rehearsal, that when I try to stream video through Zoom, the digital rights management software that's encoded in it doesn't let it stream. So we can hear the audio, but we're not seeing the video.
Are you okay? Let me. Why don't we try this? I'll just. I'll try to open it from mine, and I'll share my. Sorry, everyone. Give us 1 second. Desi, if you can see me here, can you can you share from your side the Vimeo and put it on that scene where the
At about like
where the brothers are introduced?
minutes and
yeah,
seconds.
I think you'll be faster doing it. Sorry, everyone. A minor glitch.
It'll be worth it.
Desia, you're hearing me?
Wait.
Can you stop sharing your screen, Susan, so that Desi can share her screen? Yeah. Now we see. Fatima? Yeah. Yeah, thank you. 1 second, everyone. Yeah, perfect. So play that one. You can put it on full screen, would be great.
Kaming mga talyada, always lagi niyong makikita sa network. Kaming mga talyada, ang alindog namin laging naka-display. Kahit saan kalsada,
it's stuck, right? The image is stuck.
Palandra, mahihiya kahit na sinilver sa sexy namin katawan, ang kala namin may.
Yeah. Try the Vimeo. Sorry, everyone. Can you try the Vimeo, not the video file, but the Vimeo link? Yeah. The Vimeo that you uploaded. Yeah. There.
Perfect.
Yeah. So can you play it? And it's slightly at the beginning.
Yeah, so the first scene will be after the logo. Yeah, so we see the women in the bank. Go to about 5 minutes in, and you'll see J-Lo sharing the photos of her children.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is J-Lo coming into the bank. Friends see
I'm gonna
her.
mute, sorry.
So another couple of minutes. They're saying like, "Oh, you're so beautiful. You look just like Marilyn Monroe. Where did you buy that dress?" And she says, "Well, I got married and I've been traveling the world with my husband, Antonio de Magiva. Unfortunately, says he's still in the U.S., but I've got these beautiful children who take care of me. 7 daughters, and they say, "What?" She goes, "No, wait, here, I'll show you." There's still a minute or two to go here.
Do you want to fast forward Desi to the where? Just yeah, around there. They're gonna show him the
Okay,
photographs.
here's the pictures now. Can we, have sound here?
Yeah. Is your sound working, Desi? Sorry about that, guys. There, she's gonna show the pictures now.
These are her 7 daughters. So to narrate over this, it's like they all come out of the parlors that they work in, like massage, masseuse, another sells flowers, one cuts hair, and that they all start singing. Okay, so maybe we'll just stop there and move on with a little bit more description happening.
You can share your screen now, yeah.
All right, so we can just leave that. So let's see. So what they're singing, it's like I won't translate all of it, but as the 7 siblings come out, they're basically saying, "We who are Talyada will always find us in Metta. We who are Talyada, our beauty is always on display. In any street, we are always there. Even this universe will be embarrassed by our beautiful Talyada bodies and our baby faces, especially when there are handsome men, our hearts pound, and we always want to look Talyada." So in translating most of the lyrics into English, but leaving that key term Talyada untranslated, I think it's important to not, in some ways, translate the word into some cognate. That it's really important, I think, that this old-fashioned, out-of-date term Talyada is actually the thing that the plot of the film revolves around. you know, that in the English language, title of the film, they translated as sexy. You know, Kaming Mga Talyada would translate it as we who are sexy. But sexy is a really interesting choice for translating that word. The Talyada is derived from a Spanish root. Talyada is formed on the verb formed from the verb tallar, meaning to sculpt or to measure, like the cognates in the word like tiller or tailor, and then from its feminine past participle, tallada. According to the Tagalog English dictionaries that I consulted, talya literally means a posture or a sculpture, whereas talyada means something that has been cut or engraved. The word has commonly been used to mean, according to one Tagalog speaker I talked with, he said it meant a woman's praiseworthy way of carrying herself in public, particularly through the femininity of her clothing and appearance. So talyada thus has a positive connotation when used in reference to female subjects and conveys much the same sense as the English idiomatic phrase, she cuts a nice figure. But used in reference to male subjects, talyada has derogatory implications and functions as a euphemism for the epithet bakla, usually translated into English as faggot, but sometimes as queer and sometimes recuperated in the same way that the word queer has been recuperated in English. But talyada, as I understand the meanings and connotations and nuances of the word, could have better been translated into English as the word sissy rather than as the word sexy. But sexy is the word that the filmmakers chose to use. I think there's some very interesting kind of public respectability politics going on around the choice of that word. So part of what you saw in the opening sequence of the film was that the 7 talyadas are being watched by 7 young women who live in a dormitory next to the parlors that the Dimigiba siblings run to support their mother, Chelo. One of the women remembers how manly the Dimigiba siblings used to be before Chelo manipulated them into femininity so that they would never get married and support her. And the young women vow to make men of the Dimagibas again, which then inaugurates the whole plot of the film. That they're trying to, it's like kind of like 7 brides for 7 brothers. There are many comic situations based on, you know, double entendres, sexual double codings, playing with pronouns. And throughout it all, the Dimigiba siblings who are talyada remain aloof and oblivious to the advances of the women who are pursuing them. But a turning point in the courtship comes when a group date is organized to go see Christine Jorgensen at the nightclub. And there's a scene where Chelo runs into the room where all of her children are sleeping. She starts shouting, she goes, girls, this is something very exciting. Christine Jorgensen has come to Manila. She's at the Black Cat nightclub. We all have to go. And so the 7 women next door, you know, arrange it as kind of like a double date. So it's like they're all paired up. Chelo's chaperoning them, and they then go to see Jorgensen at the nightclub. Now, I do have the clip of Jorgensen at the nightclub that was embedded in my PowerPoint presentation, and let's go back to that and see if this works any better. All right, fingers crossed. This is the nightclub scene. So Jorgensen has already walked down those stairs for her first number. does a little patter with the audience, and then she's about to do her second number. Now, the person that you will see speaking with her is actually Tony Callado, who's the director of the film. And there's a very meta level conversation going on here where Christine Jorgensen is asking the director of the film that she's in if he can put her in a film. So I will let you see that. And this is actually the like 10 minutes or so of the film that shows Jorgensen's nightclub performance is the best surviving documentation of what her classic nightclub act looked like. It's like there's not any better documentation of that performance anywhere else than this film. The number that we're about to see, however, is one that was done specifically for the film. Okay, let me get back to okay, here we go.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And now, since I've been here in the Philippines, I have been asked to, well, maybe try to do Tagalog song. But I'm not speaking very much Tagalog these days, sort of salamat po, etc. So I wonder if there's anyone here who could come up and help me with my Tagalog. Oh, thank you very, very much. Yes, really to help you. Incidentally, you see, I'm a movie director. You know, all kind of songs. English, Tagalog, Italian. Can you put me in the movie? Huh? Can you put me in the movie? Wait a minute. That would be like the uplifting song. Oh, all right. Now, you want to sing a song? Yes, I would love Tagalog. Tagalog. What's the title? Don't tell me. I know it. Chikirikip Alibambam. Sila Bambam. Who? Tagalog song. No, it's not that. Well, you know what one of those. Trying to fire. Can you give me the words while I try to do it? Sure, lady. I can do that for you. Come on, maestro. Dahil sa'yo. Dahil sa'yo. Nais kong mabuhay. Dahil sa'yo. Hanggang mamatay. Puso ko'y tanong. Puso isang tanawin. Wala ng ibang iyo. Pananin na naging niliw. Puso ko'y tanawin. Puso ko'y tanawin. Puso ko'y tanawin. Ikaw at ako rin. Ikaw at ako rin. Dahil sa'yo. Dahil sa'yo. Ako'y lumigaya. Ako'y lumigaya. At mamahal. At mamahal. Ay alayan ka. Ay alayan ka. Kung tunay may mako. Kung tunay may mako. Ay alisin ko. Aluy ay tingko. Now I think I may be finished this one by myself. Okay, what? Maestro, please. Ang lahat ng ito dahil sa'yo. Contract. Oh, thank you very much. I'll see you in the dressing room later. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much. And I should like to say now to you just for a moment that really I shouldn't have done this number this way because it's a beautiful tune. I do hope that the composer will forgive me. But I should like to say, mabuhay.
All right. I think in the interest of time, we're not going to try to put up another clip because glitchy technical difficulties. So where does the film go from here? So this is the turning point in the plot. That after this scene, it cuts back to the 7 young women we see there in the front row. And the ringleader says, "Oh, something horrible has happened. J-Lo has decided after seeing Christine Jorgensen that she's going to send all of her children to Europe to have surgery so they can be like Christine Jorgensen and make even more money and become international celebrities like her." And of course, if that happens, then they will never be eligible young men for the young women to marry. So the young women decide that they're going to ask the father to come home from the United States. So they write to Captain Dimagiba, who I learned that in Tagalog, Dimagiba means something like cannot be destroyed. And so that, we have the, that which cannot be destroyed being threatened by being cut and sculpted in a Talyada-like way. So this is what sort of sets up the whole the core conflict in the film. So Captain Dimagiba comes back. He tries to masculinize his sons. He's trying to toughen them up. Nothing works. He has them drafted into the army. They go through boot camp. They're still Talyada. Military order breaks down. The family is humiliated. The Dimagiba siblings wind up in the stockade. The father, loses all of his patriarchal, heteronormative masculinist authority. He's just, he's very, very ashamed. The 7 young women think, oh, why did we ever try to change them back? Everything is just a mess. And then where does the film go from there? Everything has kind of come to a screeching halt. Well, fortunately for the plot, there is a Moro insurgency in Mindanao province, and Captain Dimagiba decides that he is going to lead his 7 feminine children on a suicide mission to kill the rebel Datu Roman, who is threatening an insurgency that will destroy the territorial integrity of the Philippine nation. And the tenor of the film shifts really remarkably at this point. It's been very lighthearted, comic. I mean, I find some of the scenes that are supposed to be funny incredibly homophobic and transphobic, but they're played for comedy. It's intended as kind of a light comic film, but then when the Dimagibas go to Mindanao, the tone of the film really shifts, becomes serious like a war movie, and the 7 Dimagiba children see their father shot on the battlefield, gravely wounded. They think he's dead. It turns out he's not dead, but he's gravely wounded. And in seeing their father, they think killed by the Moro insurgents, they become enraged. They recover their masculinity, and they kill the Moros in bloody hand-to-hand combat, and then return with their wounded father to Manila as war heroes. And sort of at the end of the film, sort of like a very normative social order is restored. The 7 brides get their 7 brothers. Everybody gets married. J-Lo is properly chastised for having tried to queer her kids. There's a big happy family reunion, and that's pretty much where the film ends. There is an argument to be made about the ways that part of what we're seeing is in the Talyada story versus the Christine Jorgensen transsexual story is that one way of being, let's say, for lack of a better term, sort of like gender diverse, gender queer, trans, however you want to name that, across the linguistic and cultural differences, is that Jorgensen's transsexuality is ultimately represented as being incompatible with the nation because it destroys the reproductive capacity of the gender non-conforming body. Whereas this Filipino way of doing it, the Talyada way, it actually allows the expression of a Talyada-like or bakla-like male femininity in a way that ultimately doesn't interfere with marriage, citizenship, military service, the sort of the organization of the state's population through the way it categorizes and manages the genders and sexualities of its citizens. Which is an awful lot of, sort of academic-y jargon right at the end of the talk, but that's sort of the argument I make about the function of Jorgensen nestled in the middle of this like very wild plot that ultimately doesn't have a lot to do with her, but it's the juxtaposition of the two, of Jorgensen as the counterpoint to the Filipino Talyada identity that I think is the real heart of the film. So I'm going to stop there and we'll go to comments and questions. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but I hope it will encourage you to find a way to watch this film and that you can get a copy of it up and running on your Vimeo channel. All right, I'm out. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan. That was great. Yes. Don't worry about the technical stuff. I think your narration was perfect. I am going to try to just force my share screen because I just found that screen that you were sharing just for people to get a visual around it. You're seeing my screen now?
I see your.
You see my screen, right? Yeah, perfect. So.
This is Mindanao. From Zamboanga, ay ihahatid tayo ng sasakyang dagat patungong Isla de Jolo na pinamumugaran ng masasamang loob na pinamumunuan ni Dr. Ramat. This is our objective.
Yeah, just to give some sense, some visual background there. We will share this links to anyone who is interested and to see the whole movie. But thank you very much, and we can engage more in the discussion in relation to some clips. If you want to go back, I can do something technical, but I'll just introduce directly our moderator of the QAA, Yaya Jacobo, who teaches literature, queer theory, and transgender studies at the Ateneo de Manila University. At the University of UP Diliman, she is the postdoctoral research fellow of the Philippine Work Package of Global Grace, Gender and Culture of Equality Project. She has done fieldwork in Brazil and collaborated with transsexuals and transvestites in Rio de Janeiro. She is co-editor of a forthcoming anthology of trans writings from the Philippines and its diaspora. So without further ado, we're gonna have Yaya to do some immediate reaction to the talk, and then for anyone who wants to join the conversation, you can send us a chat or ask for the microphone as well. But I think we want to hear first, like, Yaya's response and to engage in dialogue with Susan.
Thank you so much, Inti. Good afternoon, everyone. We thank you, Professor Susan Stryker, for this most instructive and most thought-provoking presentation. Can you hear me? Okay. Your talk has demonstrated the paradox of trans through transsexual as a term that travels. You interrogate its mobility in the post-colony as a prospect that is by turns desired and foreclosed. It is desired as it indexes through Christine Jorgensen a polysemic matrosexuality, a line of flight for gender nonconforming bodies repressed by the state. At the same time, trans is also a possibility foreclosed as it does not serve a Christian nationalist project that depends on normative masculinity to displace an internal ethno-religious other, the Muslim. You complicate the conundrum, however, by essaying the vernacularity of the bakla as a Filipino kind of queerness, and more particularly, the idiomaticity of Talyada as a trans-Filipina kind of sexy somatechnics. This is your term in the paper that was circulated before the talk. Pointing to a transgender alongside a transsexual root, the Talyada, in her playful sculpting, contouring, and posturing of gender itself, proves herself incommensurable with and untranslatable into the monolithic whiteness of Euro-American anatomopolitics and biopolitics. To open our forum, I would like to present two questions. A while ago, you told us the circumstances of you finding the text, but I'm really curious at your immediate reactions once you saw the film. Secondly, I was hoping that you would show the ending of the film, wherein the sergeant that trains the seven sisters into brotherhood or whatever, reveals herself to be a Talyada as well. And towards the end of your paper, you make this point about the return of the transgender local as proposing to us a mode of post-colonial resistance. I was just wondering, with that return of the repressed, the Talyada, how can we be assured that intersectionally, trans in that second moment would find affinity with other marginalities within the post-colony? Of course, the answer may not be in the film, nor in the Philippine setting, but I was just wondering if there are examples from the current trans literature that you can point us to. So thank you very much. And I look forward to our discussion from your wonderful talk.
No, thank you. Yeah, the way the film actually ends, to just describe that, as you were suggesting. So after what I think of as the happy heteronormative ending, where it looks like everything has been restored to its sort of proper patriarchal place, we cut back to the drill sergeant in the military, who's played by Eddie Garcia. And I think there's actually a very, right, I saw that look on your face. So there's a lot of layers to unpack there about him playing this role. So he's presented in the film, the drill sergeant is presented as the sort of very butch, macho, it's a very aggressive figure who's trying to masculinize the Talyadas.
I'm gonna try to put that moment, okay?
Okay. And so, there we go. So at the very end of the film, we see him with a new bunch of recruits. And he's giving them the same speech that he had given to the Dimagibas. He's saying, like, you're all a bunch of dogs. It's like, you're beneath me. It's like I'm basically saying, like, I'm your top. I dominate you, and you need to submit to me. And then as they march off, when no one can see him anymore, he starts swaying his hips in the way that the Talyadas have swayed their hips all throughout the film.
Wow.
So and that's the end, the final shot of the movie. And so the argument that I was making there is that there's a particular nationalist way that like Filipino nationalism is preserved by warding off the U.S. version of, transsexuality in the figure of Jorgensen, but is actually reproduced through the figure of the Talyada, and so that it becomes like a transgender local, as you were saying, and that it's shown in what's supposed to be the comic denouement, the comic climax at the end of the film, is that being Talyada is actually compatible with military service, with the maintenance of the state, with the maintenance of normative gender roles, because it's not embodied according to that, what I think of as like the Eurocentric biologistic notion of how identity is supposed to be wedded to the flesh, which I think is something that comes out of the Atlantic slave trade ultimately, that there's a biocentric ordering of the world that wants to make flesh mean something permanently that subjugates someone in the position of enslavement. So it's like out of that sense of how bodies and identities work based on biological difference. It's like the Western notion of transsexuality is rooted in that kind of biocentric, biologistic notion of identity, which means like to be assigned male at birth but be femme means you need to change your body in a biologistic way. Whereas in the framework of the Talyada and the Bakla, it's something that can be performed, enacted, it's through movements. One of the etymologies I was told for the word Talyada was not just about tallar, but also the word, probably going to mispronounce it, I think it was talsik, that meant like splash or ejaculation, the idea that hands move around and splash and that you show your femininity by the particular ways you sashay and flip your hands or snap your fingers. And so that movement at the end, what you're seeing is like the swaying hip. It's like, it's this way of enacting Talyada without embodying transsexuality. It's completely compatible with Filipino nationhood. Anyway, I thought that was quite interesting. And I think maybe in answering the first question, I answered your second one. So okay, done.
Yeah. Like, what were your initial reactions when you first saw this?
Reaction to the film. So when I first found it, got the VHS copy and played it, I mean, I was immediately just captivated. That opening song and dance number is like, whoa, this is not what I was expecting at all. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. I watched the whole thing through, and it's mostly in Tagalog with some Spanish and some English. And so most of it was, passing me by, but just going like, all right, what just happened? It's like, how do we get from going to Christine Jorgensen's Nightclub Act to the jungles of, Mindanao and going to invade Holo province, and it's like, what is happening here? So I found somebody who could give me a rough translation of what was being said, and then when I knew more, like when I could understand more what was going on in each scene, I just thought, oh, this is like far more than what brought me here. Like I was interested in the film, one, because of, it was Jorgensen related, but two, I was looking for archival footage of her. It's like, I went to the film just because I thought, oh, maybe I'm going to find some good archival footage of Jorgensen performing. And that was really my only interest. But when I saw it in context, I thought this is a really deep, rich, complicated text about the post-coloniality of gender variance. It's about whiteness. It's about the way that this Jorgensen circulates transnationally as kind of like a figure of U.S. empire. It's about the biopolitics of the body, just like this. It's like, I need to write about it. I need to think about it. I hope I can do justice to the Filipino side of the equation. It's like, I feel like I got the Jorgensen and the theoretical framing from my background, it's like, that felt solid to me. But, I sort of worried about, can I do justice to the cultural complexity that I'm seeing in this film? And, that's the part where I'm like, yeah, I don't know, like, I'm kind of ignorant, just like, I hope I do it justice. And, I would really love for the film to be like taken up by Filipino film scholars and discussed more. It's just like, there's very little writing on this. There's very little memory of the film. In fact, the one place that I saw it mentioned in any Filipino film studies were J. Neil Garcia. He in some of his he mentions in a couple of sentences that I saw this film on television when I was a kid, and it had a Christine Jorgensen impersonator. And it's like, no, it's like, that's actually Christine Jorgensen. And so there was even like a misremembering of the film, or a not recognizing what was going on in the film, and the one mention that I had found of it. So anyway, I hope it can become a text that is better known than it is.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah. There's some questions on the Facebook. Do you want to read them?
Facebook.
Yeah, or I can read them for you then. It's okay. It's basically two questions. One is from Simon Soon. He's saying, is there a difference between the usage of the word talyada versus bakla?
As I understand it, yes. And that talyada is a very like old-fashioned word that nobody really uses, and that it was considered to be kind of a euphemism for the word bakla. That bakla was not something that you would say, or even now would say, like in polite company. It's derogatory, and that talyada was something that was like a milder version of that. And the way that I translated it in my own head would be, bakla would be like saying faggot or queer, and talyada would be like saying sissy or pansy or Nelly or early man or something like that. That it was something that was softer, a little bit more comic, still a put down, but that it didn't have the kind of visceral force of bakla. Would that be an accurate way of thinking about it?
What? Yeah. You who are
bakla remains the more stable identity, and it encompasses gender, identity, expression, sexual orientation. But talyada seems to present it's how does the bakla perform? Is she more feminine or masculine or in between? So and talyada points to a more transgender kind of composure in that manner. So usually we would just use bakla to encompass everything, and it does work, but talyada presents this new angle, this new possibility that in the present we don't use talyada, but we use some other words like lambot, which means you're soft, you're a Barbie, or if you're not Barbie, you are a robot. We would say robotic or Barbie, right? So we would try to compliment ourselves by saying you're soft, you're talyada, or if there's point of comparison, if you're, for example, beginning to sculpt yourself in through the various processes of transition, you are still trying to talyar. So, and this is a wonderful reminder that there's a sense of fluidity or flexibility to kabaklaan that talyada presents to us. I was once referred to as talyada by a more mature gay man, because that belongs to their generation.
Yeah, what I was told when I was, first starting to research the film by someone who was an older woman, like a generation older than me, who actually used to work at Sampaguita Pictures and knew when this film was made. She said, talyada is the word we used for gays back then. We couldn't say bakla, in public. So that was, got the sense of it as kind of a euphemism. A softer way of saying something.
Softer way.
Yeah.
More endearing way, I guess.
Yeah.
There's another comment from Teddy Oko. This is more of the schooling that you were mentioning, an ESKWELA moment coming from the audience. He says that actually the mustachioed man singing Talasayo with Christine Jorgensen is not the director of the movie, but Carlos van der Tolosa, the biggest film director of the 1930s, who helmed the first productions of Sampaguita, LBN, and Parlatone in the late 30s. He was an in-house filmmaker of Sampaguita during the early 60s. Talyada's director, Tony Callado, plays Captain Tiguibal, the father of the 7 boys.
Oh, wow.
Oh, thank you so much. I stand corrected. So, hey, that's great. Is that in the chat feature or is it on Facebook? Because I love the link.
That's on the Facebook, yeah.
Great. So maybe I can cut and paste that and attribute it, Just thank you so much for that information. That adds another layer.
Yeah. There's also now that we mentioned the father, if people are online and are interested, maybe I have a question related more on trying to get you to speak a little bit more on that shift in the movie when the father is shot by the Moro insurgency in Mindanao, and that's like the triggering part now when they bring back they recover their masculinity. I'll just play it a bit for people, maybe. Are you seeing it well? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's actually the director then. So the director is the father.
Yeah, that's him.
I see Eddie Garcia.
I'll just fast forward here. That's the moment when.
It's Charlie DeVal.
There's so many well-known actors in the film.
Mm-hmm.
The woman who plays J-Lo was the queen of the Philippine cinema, quote unquote.
Yeah. I guess my question was trying to remember some conversations before that you've made of what it meant in terms of them taking over an Islamic insurgency. I think you had some kind of narrative around.
Well, you know, I mean, and again, this is I prepared to be schooled, but you know that the Sultanate of Holo had been Islamicized. I don't know, like 6th, 7th, 8th century via India. It had been Islamic for centuries before the Spanish arrived, and that the Moros, like in that even the name itself comes from the Spanish Moor, that it had been claimed by Spain, but it's like their local sovereignty. They had never renounced it. They never recognized Spanish rule. When the U.S. came and the Spanish-American War, and Spain ceded the Philippines to the U.S., including Polo. It's like the Moros refused to recognize U.S. sovereignty when it became the Republic of Philippine Republic. That it was like didn't recognize that either. So that the Moros have always been this conflation of like the Black, the indigenous, the Muslim, that represents the internal orientalized, ethno-nationalist, ethno-religious threat to the sovereignty of the empire and the nation that tries to claim it. And so, you know, how is it that the normative male citizen soldier becomes a man and secures the territory of the nation is precisely by killing off the internal threat to the national territory. You know, that so that you kill off the Moro insurgency and restore the normative masculine figure of the nation. So it was just, it was so obvious, direct. It's like it was like, this is how you take the bad subject of the Talyada threatening to become transsexual and renationalize them, renationalize and remasculinize them, specifically through the killing of the Islamic internal threat. So, you know, it's just the relationship between the body politics and the body politic, you know, is just the relationship between the individual level and the societal level, and thinking about like which body is able to be a body of the nation. It's just so it's such a great example of biopolitics. You know, a nationalist body politics, a nationalist habitus, a nationalist version of sex, gender, sexuality that allows the nation to be the nation. So yeah, for a very light comic film, it's like its themes are actually quite profound, I think.
Yeah, I'm curious what people in the chat and in the room here think, but this is a recurrent, especially now with the current president, the Islamophobic discourse as part of the macho nation building is great. It is part of the Duterte propaganda. Yeah, it came back with its own tone, but it is part of this macho figure that sees again Mindanao as a threat and constructs that threat. No, I don't know. This is just a provocation. I don't know, Yaya, how you feel about it.
Well, he seems to represent a folk kind of sentiment that more or less catapulted him to presidency, and we were expecting some sort of a revision from previous bourgeois readings of nation, but it seems like it's reproducing these narratives of marginalization, right? And we've seen that in the current drug war, and no particular reforms being made for. Well, he did try to be friendly with the left, but abandoned the particular project. So it's a predicament that's being confronted right now at this very moment. So we'll see. And there's an anti-terrorism bill to be signed. So
yeah,
these are the times.
I have a question here from Queen Mello, related specifically, to this discussion, and another question back to the Talyada question. She is saying, I'm curious actually if the American Embassy had any involvement in this film, knowing how they use Hollywood and cinema for their propaganda to use the story of Muslims in Mindanao as enemies of the state. Do you know anything around that?
Yeah, I totally, I hear your point, and yes, the U.S. often does that, but I mean, it's like, and I don't think they did it in this case because Jorgensen would not be seen as a positive representation of the U.S., that it's like, that wouldn't be what the state's interest would be. She had a hard time getting on television. She certainly would not have been government promotion of her as like a, sort of ambassador of U.S. culture, elsewhere. I really do think from what I've seen, and it could be proved wrong, but what I think is that it was driven almost entirely from the Sampaguita Pictures end of things. It was just like an opportunity to take advantage of someone who had a national or international profile being in Manila, and they just wanted to make a quick chunk of change on that. So no, I don't think the U.S. Embassy was involved at all. Well, one of the things we didn't have a chance to talk about, but
something happened.
Something, okay.
There.
Okay, my bad. So embassy, no, I don't think so, but yeah, sure, the U.S. often does that. One thing we didn't have a chance to mention earlier, or that I didn't mention earlier, is that Sampaguita Pictures actually had very high hopes for this film. They thought it was going to be huge, and they had written a treatment, not a full screenplay, but an extended treatment for a follow-up film called, of all things, Christine Goes Native, where the plot was that Jorgensen was staying at the fancy hotel in downtown Manila, and her fans, aren't giving her enough rest, and she's very harassed and harried, can't get away from the paparazzi. So she decides to go to some rural place to sort of have a retreat, and that while she's en route, her chauffeured limousine crashes, drives off the road, and she's lost in a deep jungle ravine and found by a primitive, isolated tribe of jungle dwellers who worship her as a white goddess. It's kind of like a Gilligan's Island version of Christine Jorgensen and the
We should do it.
And yeah, no, it's like that would, anyway, so like there were plans to make that film, and then everybody thought Jorgensen was very boring in this film, and she is. I mean, her act, I think it didn't sparkle, and so for all of the high hopes that the film had, box office was not very good, and the plans for doing Christine Goes Native were shelved, and that was really the end of Christine Jorgensen's film career. She did come back to the U.S. And try to put another film deal together. She had acquired the rights to an old Indiana Jones-like adventure story called She by H. Rider Haggard, which again, I think this tells us something about Jorgensen's mindset. She, Aisha, she who must be obeyed, is an ancient, immortal white goddess who is worshipped by primitive dark-skinned people. And you've got the adventurer hero Indiana Jones-like character who discovers the temple of Aisha. She falls in love with him. He spurns her. She decides to stop being immortal and die. And Jorgensen was going to play Aisha, she who must be obeyed. And again, they had already gone to contract on this. They had costumes. They were doing location shooting. There was a script being written. And then Hammer International Films also did a version of She starring Ursula Andress that came out before the Jorgensen version could get made. But here yet again, we've got the white transsexual celebrity from the US imagining herself as a goddess who's being worshipped by a racialized other. And it's quite a revealing window, onto the phenomenon of mid-20th century transsexuality.
There's one more, just maybe the last ones. There's a chat. Do you want to read it?
Yes.
Yeah, from AK. Yeah.
So this is from AK. I am reminded of a written work by Jenny Garcia of how the Filipino bakla is an identity that conflates the identity of gays and the transgender. I was thinking whether the peculiar acceptance of the Talyada is based on how Filipinos view the bakla identity as a spectacle and the essentialized comic figure. Okay.
Do you want to answer that one?
Oh, okay. The acceptance of the Talyada is based on how Filipinos view the bakla identity as I think I think AK is giving us a particular observation that can provoke certain investigations as to how performance creates a socius, and it's difficult for trans women to transition socially in the Philippines because that's the only visibility that they have as objects of spectacle and comedy, and beyond that, and it has material implications, right? They can only be employed in such particular scenes. Outside that arena, if a transgender woman, a bakla, offers a kind of seriousness, then she might not make it. So I think that's the only form of visibility that Philippine society has given us. And somehow the film and your presentation has given us that leverage that there can be gays and trans people in the military, and they can partake in nationalist projects. They will have to render abject other marginal peoples, but they can participate. That was your point, and it's problematic as it seems, but it does depart from that essentializing figure of the Talyada as object of ridicule.
Yeah, sounds persuasive to me.
It's in the film, so I'm not sure if in reality gays or trans are able to make it in the Philippine military, but the film does give that possibility.
Right.
So,
yeah, one of the things I was interested in when I was first writing on this is that I wasn't finding a lot of literature that this is like a decade ago that was relating Talyada and bakla to transgender, transsexual, like it was all in relationship to notions of homosexuality and queerness. And so the quotes that I used in the article that I wrote on this, I say, according to J. Neil C. Garcia, bakla, this is a quote from him, bakla and homosexual are terms belonging to two different knowledge systems, and therefore they can only irrevocably be different from one another. And then Martin Manalansan describes the relationship between gay and bakla as being somewhat more flexible, quote, not self-contained modes of identity, but rather two coexisting yet oftentimes incommensurable cultural ideologies of gender and sexuality. And so while both of them were writing on the relationship of bakla / Talyada to homosexuality and gayness, neither of them were talking about transness. And part of what I was suggesting was, you know, I don't want to say, oh no, really the Talyada is trans, not gay, but to say there's this other dimension, like there's this other dimension of the transing of gender that we see in these figures that isn't reducible to Western notions of homosexuality. It's like you have to like put the trans in conversation with these categories as well. And when you do, it's like you can come up with these sort of different configurations of identity and embodiment, and a different politics of like, what is it that you're, what transnational imaginaries are you relating to, right? You know, that it's like, what would a transnational imaginary look like, or a global trans look like, rather than the globalized Western version of homosexuality. And so, you know, part of what I saw in the film was a way to, you know, ask that question. It's like, well, what happens when we think Talyada and bakla through trans rather than gay? Like, oh, like it shows us these two different things. And I just, you know, I don't think of it as like I said, like a replacement, or like one of them was right or one of them was wrong, or this is the new way and that was the old way. It's just, you know, they give us different lenses for looking at the same thing.
I think that's it's great that you brought that up. I think there was another comment in relation to this about like what it meant in a certain moment and how could those terms be used towards the present. And Queen Melo is also contributing to the linguistic discussion around Talyada, saying that to my friends who lived in the 70s up to now, they use Talyada to mean fabulous to the highest level. Talyada ka is ponga ka. You are fabulous. It comes from detallada, to have attention to detail, to be fabulous. Yeah.
Sharp. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. I'll just play. I think we can end a bit and have the pleasure and not go frustrated with seeing that clip, so that it's more smooth.
And what happens, there's a tough street gang who wants to like beat up the queer boys or queer girls, and the Talyadas beat them with their shoes, and they all wind up going to jail together.
Lucky then.
Yeah, that's the main part, right? Yeah.
Good. Yes, thank you. I hope we didn't
Okay.
miss any other comment. I mean, we could go ages here. As I said, we'll share this. I want to thank Susan. It was wonderful. Again, apologies for the technical part, but I think just hearing you, it's such amazing.
Thanks. I think we got to a good place by the end. We got enough content out there.
Yeah,
To have a
yeah.
good conversation.
And
So
it was incredible. Just to give a recap for people who logged in a bit late, we are doing these seminars online with guests that we had either planned to have physically come to Manila, or we now have the opportunity to even have more conversations with people that were finding difficulties in their schedules to come to the region. So it's actually wonderful to some extent, this new conditions. We at Belas Artes, we're definitely emphasizing on our education program, and ESKWELA will become this education virtual platform. Susan's talk today was under the topic of queer Filipiniana, which is a topic that we want to continue, and that it's a way for us to queer something so related to nation building, such as Filipiniana and the material culture around what is considered Filipiniana. And definitely this film is like a treasure of queer representation. So very early on, which whenever I describe this film to friends, I think the first thing that comes around is the date, that it's by 1962. To have this kind of representation in cinema is something that not many other histories of cinema of countries of the global south, to put it that way, have them. So it's quite important both that it exists, but it's quite important that we keep on discussing it, and that Susan brings this whole discussion around it. So thank you very much. Yeah.
my pleasure. And I said, I hope we can like maybe find a way to work together somehow to like get a better copy of this out into wider circulation. But thanks so much for having me. It was great.
Great. Thank you. And stay safe for the
audience.
Support.
Thanks, NT, Susan.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone, it's great. Let's be in touch, okay?
Yes,
Take
please.
care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.